This episode is sponsored by Property Filter. Find great deals faster.
Hello, and welcome to the Financial Freedom Podcast, sponsored by us at Property Portfolio Building. This podcast is designed by real people on their journey to achieving financial freedom, and we'll focus on people who've either already attained it, who are joining us on that journey, or maybe a specialist topic that can help you build your technical knowledge to achieving and maintaining that financial freedom. We hope you enjoy it.
Right, welcome back to the Financial Freedom Podcast. Today we've got one of our technical episodes, and today we're going to be talking all things planning, navigating the planning process, and a few successes and failures and challenges in the planning process. So with me as always on these technical episodes is my friend and colleague, Phil Bargrave.
Hello, mate. You all right?
Good, yeah, good to have you on board. Have
Thanks.
you in the hot seat as well.
Yeah, all things planning. Let's do it.
Let's get into it. So firstly, my question for you is, I just want you to do a bit of an introduction of planning in the UK at the moment and the space that we work in, which is like the small scale development space.
Yeah, sure. So I don't think you can do anything first and foremost in property renovatory development without coming up into the planning space at some point, especially if you're going to do something with tangible value. So if I just maybe talk about the typical things we apply for, because planning is weird and wonderful, right? So you know if you ever go onto the planning portal or you read don't do this. You read the National Planning Policy Framework. Don't do that.
I know you do a bit too much of this. Too much of your time.
If you ever do those things, well, I just like to know what technically I can get away with when I'm looking at a property. I shouldn't say get away with. Yeah. What is going to add value to the communities. Mm-hmm. Freudian slip there with get away with. In terms of when I'm looking around a property, kind of like, well, that might be this policy. What would work, what might not work. Obviously you've got all agricultural policies. You watch Clarkson's farm, for example. He can't even build a track on his farm. But the UK planning framework is a democratic framework. You have your Town and Country Planning Act, and then that's been brought into something called the National Planning Policy Framework, which is supposed to digest the Act. It's done it badly in some places, as we found out. Yeah. Along the way, which we'll talk about. But in general, they're your main guides. And then when we're doing small scale property development, we're not really doing ground up. So we don't really have greenbelt issues. We don't have, new connection type issues in terms of like having to get, waterways and so on like that. Ours is more changing the use of something. So under planning, there's two types of things that are classed as development that affect us as small scale developers. One is material operational works, and normally to the exterior of a building. So if you're doing facade changes, or you're doing, dormers, or you're doing, extensions, or you're doing, even sort of like you've got a plot of land and you're going to do maybe one little small new build or something like that. All of those are material changes that come under planning. Some of them fall under the General Permitted Development Order, the GDPO, things like back dormers generally, but some of them require full planning permission. The second type of development is change of use. Now, that's the one that we come up with the most, because if you're, say, taking a commercial building, let's say it's a office, it comes under the planning use class E, and you want to use it for residential purposes. Let's just say it's a standard flat, as an example. Then it would be a use class C3. So what you're doing is under the use classes order, under the Town and Country Planning Act, you're changing from class E to class C3, and that requires some form of planning permission. Now, under use classes, there are still some permitted developments. So movement between use classes, as an example, if you've got the same use class, permitted. So if you wanted to change an office to a retail, they're both class E, there's no permission required. Or, and this is for commercial only, if you've got a large class E unit, say it was a large retail unit, you wanted to break it down into smaller units.
But 1 into 5.
But they're staying in use class E. Yep. It's not a matter for planning. Regulation, yes, but not planning. So you can just go ahead and do that. Whereas if you're doing a house to HMO, as an example, up to 6 occupants, there's a national permitted development order for that. But that's the one that we come up against the most, because obviously there are ways and means that councils can restrict permitted developments. So as an example, it's Article 4 as a direction is one of them. So if you're in a conservation area, there might be an Article 4 direction which restricts your permitted development rights, as an example. So your conservation area might be quite wide. So we've got one near us, which is the Holcombe Conservation Area Plan, where we've got a couple of properties we're renovating at the moment. Now, it's a conservation area plan, which means that you can go ahead with most of the permitted development areas, but in certain areas within that plan, there is Article 4 directions which restrict the permitted development areas, because that's a particular area of interest. So that removes the permitted development rights. In our world, the traditional use of Article 4 is to stop the C3 to C4, which is house to hit small HMO. Which is up to 6 occupants. So these are really the things that we come up against with the most. If you know, it's changing use classes and it's material changes to buildings that already exist. So if you're looking to do more sort of ground up developments, then obviously you'd have to go and do your own research. This probably isn't going to be the number one thing, but most people that we know, landlord level developers, hopefully this will add some value in some of the things that we've done.
Yeah, absolutely. So the next thing I want to talk about.
Sounded like I knew what I was talking about then. Quite a lot. You know, so
over the last 5 or 6 years, we're going to touch on how many planning applications you've been involved in and we've been involved in. Because obviously, like with the planning system, nothing's guaranteed. There always is a risk if you apply for planning and all those sort of things.
I think I mentioned it's a democratic process. Yeah. So if you are applying for planning, what that means is there might be a policy in place, but it's also the local people get a
it's still the consultation process with the public and the departments of the council and things like that to consider. So my next question to you is like, roughly how many applications have you been involved in now, and how many have we done? And then I want to know from that is like how many have been successful, how many haven't been successful. So I think it's mainly so the listeners get an idea that there is a risk involved. You can get refused, but if you're working with the people that know what they're doing and do it regularly, what sort of percentage is it, and how often does that actually happen in reality?
Yeah, so we've done to completion 38 planning applications since 2021. So I don't know how many that is a year, but let's say it's 10 because we're we're towards the end.
Close to 10 a year sales.
Yeah, so 10 planning applications a year. We currently have 4, I think, that are live right here, right now.
We want approved this week, actually.
Yeah, so, there you go. Yeah. Some of which are more advanced in terms of like you said, one approved this week. It'll be 39 that we've done to completion then.
Yeah.
So, there you go. Updated this week. Okay. And then we've got obviously some retrospective ones that we now have to do as well, which we know are coming. So we have 2 or 3 of those, which are like, we won't call it full planning. So this is like your certificate of lawful use. So CLUD, as it's more commonly known, or lawful certificate. And this is where you're using a property. Maybe a restriction is coming like Article 4, which removes the permitted development right to use that property as it's being used, but you're going to get a lawful certificate to say, well, I used it before Article 4 came in, and therefore I have the right to continue that use. Now, that's normally a requirement for more mortgage providers than anything else, because the planning office aren't going to ask you to get that. It's mainly on the lender and the security of the loan if you're getting a mortgage and so on and so forth, because they want to know that if they're lending against something that you have
because like you say, it's literally just a certificate to say what you're doing is okay, basically, and it's just some sort of evidence, really. So it's just an evidence-based thing for a lender.
Yeah, and of that 38, I think we've had 3 outright. I know you thought it was 2. I think it's 3 outright refusals. So 35 successful out of 38. So I don't know. So 3 in 38.
So it's like 90 to 95% success.
Yeah, it's about 8% failure rate, something like 92% success rate. But the thing you always dwell on, isn't it? It's the ones that don't go well.
Yeah.
Because that's the nature of the beast in terms of humanity.
I think what that shows, just purely on a numbers basis, is that there is a chance. Not everything is guaranteed. Not everything will go through, even with the best teams. But it's a high percentage if you work with the right people that will go through.
Yeah, and to be fair, one of them I agree with, which is hard. Because I actually agreed with it. I didn't agree with the process, but I agreed with the outcome, which was just then me thinking, well, why didn't I think about this earlier? And actually, we're now back at the drawing board, and I think we're going to get approval on that now. So we'll talk about maybe that one and where we went wrong.
Yeah, exactly. And I do know out of those 3, I think 2 of them were like the same planning officer as well.
Yeah,
so
we won't.
We won't name names.
We won't name names, but it was that, and that
is a bit of a people business as well at the end of the day, isn't it? Regardless,
people are people at the end of the day. Yeah, absolutely. And each council is so different as well. We were lamenting earlier this week, one of the local authorities, that for me to access the planning comments, they've had to print them off, put them onto public view in their public viewing center, and I have to go there and take photos of the planning comments, which is, there's some antiquated
It is absolutely
processes.
crazy in the current world that we're moving.
Yeah.
We've got AI integration, all this sort of stuff.
Yeah.
That is still some of the stuff that happens to the council. But anyway, that shows part of the challenge as a property investor or property entrepreneur in a way, doesn't it?
Yeah. So maybe in terms of why things have been successful is very clear now to us as well. I think that's been good. And when things have gone wrong, I think that's clearer to us now. I think we're better at decision making up front in terms of will this get through or not.
And I suppose, like you say, like anything with the refusals, you look at it in a bit more detail and get some learnings out of it moving forward, don't you? So, right, obviously we touched on it before, but there's the consultation process with the public. It's a democratic system. There's also consultation with other sectors of the council, EA, waste and flooding sectors and all these sort of things that look at highways.
Yeah.
So I want to know from you, because what do we say, 38 or 39 applications, what's the most common sort of objections and challenges that you've seen faced along the way
in the process?
In that consultation process specifically.
So you've got, first and foremost, you've got your designated expert level consultation process. So in that consultation, you've got your public and then you've got your departmental. So in the departmental, if you took environmental as an example, so environmental, we've had bat issues as an example, if I use that as an example. So
ecology
within environment, bio net gain in terms of if you're doing anything external. So if you're, as an example, I think that if we put in, it was a learning as well. It's good learning this actually. So what happened was we were converting like an old pub that had been more recently used as a commercial premises on the ground floor. I think it was last used as a pharmacy, Class E, and upstairs was residential already. It was a flat. And we were converting that on behalf of one of our clients, Hannah. Hi, Hannah, by the way. To a 7-bed HMO on the ground floor and a 5-bed upstairs. So what that meant was the 7-bed on the ground floor was more than 6 occupants. So that needed a sui generis application because on HMOs, if it's more than 6, it's no longer a C4 class. It's a class of its own, sui generis. And we have to put in a sui generis application. The one on the top floor, which was residential and 5-bed, that's permitted development because it was already class C3.
Flat C3 to a 5-bed, 5-occupant HMO.
Yeah, so whereas what its original use was a pub.
Yeah, and the other thing to point out on the 7-bed sui generis application, there was an extension at the rear.
Well, this is what we're going to talk about. Yeah. So on that, there was the pub was a traditional pub set, and it had like the back of the cellar base and the back base to it, which is where all the barrels would have been kept. And it looked like a plug. It's got 3 prongs at the back of the pub where the things were. These little outrigger things, and a lot of pubs have that, right? They have these little outriggers, like single-story extensions, just for storage and so on.
Quite narrow, weren't they?
Yeah. So what we wanted to do is knock those down and then put a new extension to the same roughly same square meterage and have that as a living space, communal living space. So when we put that application in, the second you're doing anything which is to demolish an existing structure, you have to put through an ecology report. And the ecology report that we did was things like nesting birds, bat use, and so on and so forth. Now, what we learned during that process was that a low risk of these things is not a no risk of these things, right? So, and that's a really key definition because the scale goes no risk, low risk, medium risk, high risk, right? So if you're at a high risk of bats, it means they've found bats, basically, right? There is bats, I can see them, A low risk of bats is like, we haven't found any nesting sites, but we're not going to be able to tell. There is areas where they could nest, and it is a general nesting area. So that's your low risk. A no risk is there's no evidence of bats. It's not a nesting area. It's a built-up suburb. There's probably, the likelihood is that there's no risk, right? So we put it forwards, happy as Larry, going, we got a low risk. We were like, oh, it's low risk. Therefore, we're going to put it forward to our planning application. And this was in sort of I think it was like September or something like that. We were putting the application through. Mm-hmm. And the validation came back and said, I'm really sorry. Due to your low risk of bats, you need to do a nesting survey, which was a roosting survey. Roosting. Which meant that in the new year, we had to wait until the roosting season to be able to do a roosting survey, which was like May or something like that.
Yeah, it was in the spring towards.
Yeah, it was like really late, wasn't it? It was like April, May time. So what that meant was we couldn't even get the planning application validated and moving forwards until that time. So they were going to reject it and ask us to resubmit it. So obviously, you've just bought this property, you've got this huge bridging loan on it, you're doing a planning application. Luckily, the client had bought it for cash. So there was no bridging on, but normal scenarios you'd have bought it on a bridge, and you'd have to wait till May, which is mad, isn't it? When you think about how much that's going to cost you. But at the same time, protecting the ecology is correct. It is correct. It's just the ecologist who did the report isn't willing to say there's no bats because there's a very low risk, and therefore the planning office aren't willing to take the risk either, because where we are in Greater Manchester Ecology Unit said, well, if there's low risk, we need to double check. Which fair enough. Now. Here is the thing. Luckily, we're quite solution-oriented people, right? So it was a problem, and then it was a case of cave time, right? So it took the problem away, had to think about it in practical terms about what it was, and then had another look at the site. That's what I did, because I read the report. And it's really important to read the reports, by the way, right? It's not often that people, because a lot of people just go, oh, I have to wait till May. What a nightmare. And that's it.
Yeah, read the detail.
Read the detail. And on the report, it demonstrated where the potential roosting areas were. And I noted that the roosting areas were in the original structure, not in the extension area. So our plan wasn't to affect that area. So I picked up the phone to the planning department, basically, and a really lovely bloke called David. And I said, look, mate, obviously, what do I do here? He said, well, yeah, it's really difficult. We understand the problems here. We do understand this isn't efficient. I said, well, I've read the report, and basically, I don't think it affects us because of this. And he said, well, when you instructed your report, did you ask for a full site survey, or did you ask for a survey of the area that's being affected that we need to see? And I just thought, well, of course I didn't. Why didn't I just order the bit? But I didn't know. We didn't know, did we? That we just ordered. You needed an ecology survey, right? I ordered one. There was a low risk of bats. We put it in. So we went back to the ecology company and said, listen, I know what we ordered. I know what we paid for. However, based on your report, this is happening. But what we've done is spoke to the planning office, and this is true, that actually your identified areas of roosting are no risk to the development because it's only the 3 outriggers at the back. And I sent him some photos, and he agreed. He said, yeah, that's, so if we just amend the report to say we've only the surveys for that area that you're demolishing, then I'd be happy to say that there's no risk of bats for that because it wasn't roosting compatible. It had a flat roof, so you couldn't roost on there. So then we resubmitted it. Went to Greater Manchester Ecology Unit. They agreed it. Planning office agreed it, and we validated it. We moved on with our planning application. So that was the environmental space. The typical ones are, if you're not doing significant works like that, the significant ones that we run into in terms of consultation are highways and they are heritage, right? So they're two really key.
So explain what you mean by highways.
Highways. So basically, highways is the intensification of use on the existing highway. That's technically what we come up with. We're not creating new highways. So a highway is anything, they call it highways, but it's basically any road, right? So it's any road or parking area. So they'll look at the parking provision, the number of units that you're going to put forwards, how much extra traffic that might create, how much extra footfall that might create, or any inconvenience to the existing highways. And then obviously you've got to then consider the development itself and whether or not you'll be causing concerns to the existing highways. So we've had loads of different things with this, and we if there's any risk here at all, we get a report. And typically what we find is it's one of the most objected to things as well. So even though it's a professional consultation, it's one of the most objected to things. So if you're going to
the public, the general objection is
public objections.
I live on this street. I'm worried about parking. Basically, that's the most common objection that I've seen for these sort of developments.
Yeah, so we've had it before where we've had 17 objections to an application, had to go to a committee. The highways officer hasn't objected, and all 17 objections were about the parking provisions in the area. And highways officers basically said there's no issue. But the good news is that you can get a survey company basically to come out and do a survey. That basically says, you will be okay from a highways perspective because we've surveyed at peak time X and peak time Y, this number of parking available spaces, this is the traffic flow, this is the impact of the development, and this is what we're saying. Yeah. There's also policies as well. So the local authority might have policies, which is really different each one we go to. So if you did HMOs, as an example, South East Lancashire Town, which has a policy of 0.6 cars per HMO tenant, and we've got a West Lancashire Town, which is 0.25.
They just sort of make it up, don't they, each council?
They do say that they've done the surveys themselves and that kind of stuff, but, basically they just come up with a number at the end of the day. So what that means is if you are going into an application and you're thinking, oh, well, highways might be a problem. Let's say you're going for an 8-bed sui generis, 8-occupant HMO, and you're taking over a 4-bed house. And to do that, which is about the right size, 3/4-bed house to an 8-bed sui generis property, what you're looking at is what is the policy on the existing dwelling versus the policy on the dwelling that you're going to create. So if you're doing a C3 to sui generis and you've got a 3 to 4 bed, let's say it's 4-bed, minimum 4 occupant therefore property, you could say, well, as a 4-bed, 4 occupant property, the number of cars might be 2 at half per person. Whereas an 8-bed, 8-occupant property, it's the same number of cars because it's 0.5 versus 0.25. So if you can make that balance, then you're going to net off the increase in intensity. And it's really important that you look at that. And there's some really interesting ones. So that's one that you typically use. But the one that always gets me is the retail one, because traditional retail use in most towns has a much higher car usage per square meter than a house would. As an example. So if you're thinking, I'm doing this commercial development.
As long as it's a successful business that's bringing customers in.
Well, exactly. But technically they'll have a policy on retail. So if you're a Class E retail unit and you're worried, they might not get passed for residential parking in the area. Well, I would challenge you on that, because the existing unit is a set number of square meters. So as an example, we've got a mill that we're converting, and the local authority prompted us on this. Do you remember this?
Yeah.
They actually prompted us and just said, by the way, in one of their email correspondence, our retail policy is 1 car per 20 square meters of retail space. Can you please confirm whether or not you'll be increasing?
It works out to 40 cars or something with the retail. But there's, we all saying there's about 10 car parking spaces. And we're doing 10 flats. So obviously, 10 spaces for 10 flats.
And when I picked up the phone,
better than 40 for one.
Yeah, exactly. Said, I know you're decreasing. I wanted you to make that point, because if you turn this into a co-op or a Tesco's, it'd be a massive problem for us. So they're actually then encouraging you to convert it into something of a different use class, which is a very different mindset. Because if they think, you could stick a supermarket in there over 3 floors, and therefore you need 40 car parking spaces, you've only got 10. Whereas if you have 10 flats, you might have technically needed 16, but you've got 1 per flat. Well, we're all right with that, and that was generally the concept, wasn't it? That was and again, even though that was still the most complained about point from a public perspective, the council have done their analysis and said, actually, it's a decrease in intensification.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's really uncommon. People don't know about that. So it's one of the things that I think you can use to your benefit. And then the other one, there is a waste thing as well. So, if you think about commercial and residential waste, you've got to treat those two things very, very differently. So commercial waste can be removed from the premises by a commercial waste collection unit, whereas residential waste, you generally have to allow for that either within the curtilage of the building or as a dedicated area, or on the external of the building in a dedicated owned space. So, the hard ones there is if you're doing like a street-based commercial conversion. Let's say you're doing 3 uppers into residential of that commercial unit on the ground floor. Let's say you keep that commercial, you might have to separate a space, maybe at the back of the shop or back of the commercial unit, which is specifically for waste management, because they won't allow you to put it on the street necessarily for residential waste unless you own the land, and that's a typical problem as well. But the big one that we come up against is heritage. Heritage is the one that it just seems I don't have a clue on how they make their judgments, being totally open. And there's this big difference between conservation with an area management plan and heritage. Those 3 things are very different. So as an example, we have one of our failures was a conservation area application, but we've had other applications in the conservation area, but the conservation area wasn't under the area management plan. It was just conservation. So we have to use certain materials and follow the plan, whereas follow the general conservation advice. Whereas in the conservation area management plan, it was much stricter. So our plan failed, and we've had to go back to consultation and jump through a lot of hoops and reapply on a more, specific.
I suppose the other thing to look at with heritage is obviously you can get heritage consultants on board to help with it.
Yeah, but we did.
Yeah, but also some of the challenges with heritage consultants is, like if you took a lot of the consultants that write reports for an investor that's getting paid, that's their business. They're trying to help the investor as much as possible. What I find sometimes with heritage consultants is they're very much about just protecting the heritage. They don't really care about the customer as much, in my opinion, from what I've experienced. So it's more hard to get them to help you support something. Sometimes they'll write something like, oh my God, that's going to cost me an absolute fortune. And it's going to get me through planning, but I'm going to have to add 50 grand to my budget doing all these sort of things. So, it's hard to find that balance between A, getting a heritage report consultant that will support the application, and B, to keep it within the budget that you're trying to deliver the project within. I think that's one of the key challenges.
Yeah, I agree with that. And there's a difference between your plan and sometimes your report. So you might get a heritage report, but you might not be changing all the heritage elements. Right, but the heritage report might list all the heritage elements, but it's not. You then don't have the obligation to change those heritage elements.
Yeah, it's only if you are going to change them.
It's only if you are going to change them. So it might be, the method and materials that we now use for this part of the building are these, but if you've got no intention of changing the original features of that building in that area, it's not the obligation. You then get the right to do something.
Yeah, so a good example of that, I think, would be like a building with, say, windows, like timber sash windows, something like that. There might be building A, which you literally have to replace the windows because they're knackered.
On about,
You have to replace them, so you're going to have to replace them. They're going to be quite costly. The other scenario is they're there, but they're in relatively good condition, but they might not work that well from like an acoustic perspective or a, like a heat gain perspective, whatever. So what you could do in that scenario is keep the window on the outside and then put some internal glazing or something to treat the other building regs requirements. So there's things like that you can do. It just depends on the circumstances.
And there's certain things like listed buildings, as an example, where you have to provide your condition reports and your heritage reports if there's no heritage officer. And you're listing all of the items, and you might even need to put in method statements for all those items. But that doesn't mean that forms part of your work program or your tender program. The challenge is if you don't know what you are then going to take out and keep in, is you might end up putting forwards to your builder everything. And we've done that, right?
And it's too much, isn't it?
Yeah. Oh, we didn't do that. It was one of our clients that did that. And then we put the actual scope to another one of our builders, and it was like 150 grand difference. It was significant. Big, it was a big difference because it was the difference between being given a heritage report that had everything that needed it on there, which basically the builders will say, I'm changing all these heritage elements. I need to price for that.
Yeah.
Versus what we're actually going to do.
Yeah.
So it is the right to, not the obligation to. You need to remember that.
Stop the podcast now. This episode is sponsored by Property Filter. Property Filter is the #1 property tool for today's property professional. It brings in all the data points and sources from all the property portals and auction sites into one convenient place. Then you have the option to overlay all the clever strategies found in the Property Filter blueprint to find motivated sellers faster. Now, we use it on a daily basis. It saves us over 80% of our time when looking for properties. And if that sounds like something that you want in your lives, please go to register.property-filter.co.uk/PPB, which is the discount code for this podcast. You will get 2 weeks free and a discount on your first month. That's it from me. Back to the podcast.
Okay, I think this leads fairly well into my next line of questioning. So basically, I want to know, you're a property developer, investor looking at this small scale development space. How should you go about it if something needs planning approval? Like what should you do? What's the type of information you need for your application? How do you manage the process, etc.? And how long should this process take?
Yeah, so I mean, I'll caveat everything here, which is it's all a bit grey, right?
Yeah.
So it's all
there's no complete black or white.
It's all subject to change. So you have some statutory things that you need to do. So first, but let's start with the development. Right. So when I say you just need to have a practical look at something, if it looks like what you're going to do would be really weird, then it's probably not going to get planning, So like we had a viewing recently, which I hope she doesn't mind mentioning this, but it was arranged by our team. Now we have a set process for it. It needs to have this size and shape for us to even look at it, which is our first criteria, because if it doesn't fit the dimensions of what we're going to do, there's no point doing it, because it won't work. So, and it fit the dimensions. However, it was called Museum Street, right? So it was called Museum Street, and it's a town centre. And it's called Museum Street because the museum's on it, right? And the building was next door to, I think it was like the place where you go for births, deaths, marriages. It was overlooked by the Central Museum. Pretty much on that street, it was the only non-listed building, right? So, and it's in the central conservation area. It's not grade 2, this building as a whole. And, you've just got to have a practical look at it. So our plan for that particular size of property would be a town centre. We're looking at it as residential accommodation, changing from the use class that it's currently in, which is a commercial accommodation. There is no way on God's green earth we're getting that, right? Because it is a central commercial area. It's just not happening, right? So the heritage people won't let us do it. The council look at it and go, well, it's, you're trying to put a HMO next to the births, deaths and marriages place. It's just not in keeping with the plan for the town. And that's really important because there's certain things that you can check early doors, isn't there? There's is it a dedicated industrial area, as an example?
Yeah.
So if you've got a dedicated industrial area, you're trying to convert something to flats.
Employment zone areas, the other
Exactly, employment zone area. And employment zone areas, sometimes it's worth asking for the council. And if it is a significant development in one of those areas, then that is really where I'd be asking for advice, from the local authority.
What might be interested in the future, with planning policy is that there's quite big, like you say, industrial zones and employment zones at the moment. And a lot of them are already getting quite empty because of the change in nature of the workplace and stuff like that. will the councils or through government intervention actually realize this and go, actually we need to reduce this zone or free it up so like these buildings can get
probably
use because
probably.
I looked at one and it's still on the market. It was right on the edge of an employment zone in a good location in Manchester Council. It would convert quite well to residential, really well. Across the road is residential.
Just parking on site, wasn't there?
Parking on site, perfect for that conversion. And it's been I can't remember when we offered, maybe 6 months ago or something. Still on the market.
Yeah.
It just, it's very unlikely it's going to get sold.
Yeah.
Especially for the price.
That's the kind of one where we need to agree a pre-planning application. That's the good use of those types of things, because then you're getting the council's opinion on it, aren't you?
Yeah.
I
wonder if we revisit it and just
maybe we do.
To the council.
Yeah, maybe we should. Yeah, maybe we should talk to them. Yeah, and just ask them their advice about the employment zone area, and then maybe we put in a pre-planning app for that. And that's the process, right? So before you put in a planning application, you can put in a pre-planning application. Now, if there's clear policy and clear reason to do something, and it feels and looks like it already has precedence, or there's real need for this, then the pre-app can be a real waste of time. Yep. If there's clear policy. So some councils, as an example, like from a HMO perspective, they might have Article 4, but they've got clear policies on it. So it says, right, well, we're happy for you to apply if X and Y is met. So then if X and Y is met, you apply, you're going to get through the planning process to at least the committee.
Is the democratic side.
The democratic side, yeah. So and then it's the checks, really. It's looking at it from a practical point of view, and then it's the checks. So we'd look at it from a heritage point of view, of course. But mainly it's am I increasing intensity of cars and usage? Is it environmentally okay? Can I manage my waste? These types of things. And then as long as you've generally got a good view of it, then move forwards to start the process from a planning perspective. That's the general view. There's no point heading into something if you just think, it's not going to get it, but I'm just going to chance it. It's just a waste of everyone's time and money. Because you have to pay for planning applications and all that kind of stuff. Now, the second thing to that is how you're going to buy your property, right? So if this is something you already own, it's going to be very different to something that you're trying to buy. So if it's something that you're trying to buy, and let's say it comes under prior approval, which is a form of planning application. So prior approval is something where it's already okay, right? You just need to meet those criteria that we talked about. So highways, environmental, waste management, one or two others. As long as you tick those boxes, actually, they'll still run the consultation process, but those comments don't matter. It doesn't go to committee. It's a delegated decision. Yeah, basically. And a delegated decision is what you want normally. Because a delegated decision, what that means is the planning office themselves are making the decision.
Yeah, it doesn't come down to a vote in a old chamber or whatever.
Yeah, whereas if you're non-delegated, or it's the decision officer has recommended something for approval, and you are going to the council committee because of lots of objections, you're in a different world at that point. So we'll talk about that in a minute. So if you're doing prior approval, and the easiest one to say, which is prior approval, is taking something from use class E, which we talked about, which is office and retail, generally speaking. There's lots of other bits in there, but office and retail is the one. To C3. So that comes under prior approval, as long as there's no Article 4 direction in place. And there's prior approval classes as well. I don't know why they call them classes all the time, right? So you got use class C3, use class C4, and you got prior approval class NA in G. They're the main ones. So MA is basically an empty commercial building that you can convert to residential use. Go and have a look at that as a specific. I'm not going to get into that because we've done use classes on another podcast, but go and have a look at that podcast. We've got more detail on those. So if you're doing that, it's prior approved. You can tick all the boxes. There's no reason for you not to move ahead with the purchase. If there's no prior approval and it's a full planning application, then you might want to err on the side of caution. So maybe exchange with conditional on planning, etc. Normally what we do. There's other ways of controlling the property, like through option agreements and so on, especially if there's a retrospective planning application requirement. If you're buying a HMO that doesn't have proof that it was a HMO and you have to reapply or whatever, then I would be looking to get something in place from a contract perspective, because then you can back out of it. So to protect your own investment, you can back out of it if, for example, the planning process isn't achieved. And just on that point as well, you can be very specific. So let's say you're applying for 11 flats, but you only get approval for 9 and it no longer commercially works. Well, if you've exchanged contracts on that for 11 and it's 9 and it no longer commercially works, you don't have to move ahead with the development, or you can renegotiate the price, basically.
Yeah, exactly.
Can
I critique you? I think you've missed some very, because my initial question.
What was the question? Go on. Let's go back.
So what should you do as an investor if you're going to apply for planning? So
these are the pre-checks. Right. That's all your pre-checks done, right?
Yeah.
So as an investor, if you're applying for planning at that point, there's certain steps that you need to take, right? So first and foremost, what are you applying for?
Sorry, can I stop you right now?
Go ahead.
So there's obviously certain experts you need to work with. So it's good as an investor to understand the background of and doing the pre-checks and things like that. But I do think you need to work with experts, whether it's a planning consultant or obviously we're like a source build managed company that has a lot of planning experience. We still use planning consultants as well. And then maybe an architect with lots of experience. I think you should always have them on your team.
Yeah. So
from the outset, regardless. And
at that point, you've done your site visit and so on and so forth. You're at that point of like, what's it going to be?
Yeah.
Right. So you might have sketched it out yourself or whatever. At that point, I'm looking at the professionals, professionals to help me. So the first one is a planning consultant.
Yeah.
You know, so if it's something, we do some direct applications if they're very simple applications, but normally speaking, we would instruct a planning consultant. And they're normally people who have got maybe chartered planning background or they've worked at the planning office in the councils. They understand the policies, they understand the planning framework, they understand how to interpret the planning framework, which is really difficult, right? Because what it reads doesn't mean what it means normally. Some of it's old world English, right?
Exactly.
So it's understanding those, but it's also then they can find case law. They may even have a base of case law. They may even have done similar applications where the case law that they found has been precedent to that.
Yeah.
So a planning consultant is really going to help you to navigate the waters at that point. But they're also working for you, right? So you need to always appreciate that. So the planning consultant might not say no to you, but they might use language such as, maybe think about this, or I'm not sure about whether that could be fully in policy.
The common thing is a property investor going to a planning consultant, will I get planning for this? That's a common question, isn't it?
Yeah, and they don't know.
And they, it's sort of like, that's why I touched on it a bit earlier. It's like, we've done however many applications, say 90% above being approved. Mm-hmm. So generally it's a 9 out of 10 that's going to get approved. But they can't say yes because you've got that democratic system involved and it's never guaranteed, no matter, even if 100% meets policy and all these sort of things, you might still have challenges for various reasons, political reasons as well.
And I think the earlier you get involved with your planning consultant, the better, because you may then be heading into your design phase, as an example, because you will normally in a planning environment have to put forward design. There's other consultants that you might need. Let's say you fall into a flood zone, caught us out, or ecology or whatever.
Flood consultants, ecology consultants. Yeah, they should know what reports you should put forward, like highways we talked about before. And then I also think it's that general management process, isn't it? Because they'll know, right, it's gone in. The next stage is validation, that should happen by X, or we need to follow it up. Then it goes to the consultation with the public and the sectors. That should finish on this date, so we should follow up on those comments. Because I think where a lot of investors get it wrong, they go, I had a planning application that took 12 months. I don't think they would have managed it. Like they might have, the validation process might have just gone out of control. They didn't respond to stuff they needed to. Then that spiraled and that's suddenly a few months. Then they got that sorted. And then, got into the consultation and there was loads of info the council needed and they didn't properly respond to it or know what was required or manage it. And then that spiraled time frame wise. So I think that's when the 12-month process happens. It's A, missing information, B, not responding to what the council need, and C, just not generally managing it properly.
And that's and you're right there. And the thing about it is the planning consultant will advise you as to what they think based on your application, what they think you will need. So they will go and check out things like the local ecology. They'll check out things like the local flood zones and so on and so forth. And they will tell you up front what's needed, so then you can go and find that. They'll probably have recommendations as well for people that you could use. That maybe they've worked with in the past or whatever.
I do also think that's one of the real advantages of a planning consultant compared to, say, an architect. Because there's lots of architects who can submit a planning application because they're not trained in planning background necessarily. They're, like you said, they might not be able to interpret the policy as well. They might not have enough time, or their fee's not high enough to go and do the background checks of the application to see what reports are needed, and then also the general management throughout. So although architects can submit it, this is obviously depends. Some are good at it, some aren't that great at it. But you just need to be conscious that.
And I see it sometimes. I see an architect that we know. He posted a few weeks back saying just had to challenge a local authority in a planning process because they've already set a precedence for this, but they're refusing this application. And that's a real. That's the difference between a planning consultant and an architect, in my opinion. The planning consultant is bothered about where the current legislation is, because they're up to date and they're on the ball, and that's what they do. And I would engage in
And you're not on the back foot necessarily, you're more on the front foot.
Yeah, so
maybe.
Precedence in the past doesn't equal current process, and actually density could be a problem. So you might have precedence for something, but the planning officer will actually, from our spatial management plan, that would mean that it would tip the balance in what we want from this type of property in this area. Planning consultant might know that, whereas an architect probably won't. So it's really important, I think. And they can also work with the architect to advise and so on and so forth. Which is really
work
good.
together.
Yeah, absolutely. And then other consultants as well, like you talked about, getting all the ecology and the highways if needed. I mean, and they will advise if needed as well, which I quite like.
Sometimes acoustic reports.
Yeah.
So you could get all these reports done, and it's going to help your application, but you might have spent 10 or 15 grand too much that you needed to with those reports. So it really is a balance. We've got a council we work with quite regularly that we know that a highways report definitely helps the applications. We do that, we recommend it, and it does help the applications.
And that's a good council to work with, by the way, because they tell us. They literally ring you. They tell us as well, and they say, actually, this is your typical objection for this type is going to be this. However, we believe if you get a highways report done, you'll be able to mitigate that risk. And that's good advice to get from a local authority. Not all local authorities are helpful.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. That comes down to sometimes the people in the council that are just more helpful and those sort of things as well.
So your planning consultant's also going to submit your application. Now, if you do that yourself, you can do that via the planning website and so on and so forth, but they're going to submit it for you, and they're going to know the process is a little bit better than you. But the submission process is it's straightforward, but there's certain things in there that you need to include, certain things that you don't. There's certain things that you need to categorize. If you don't know what you're doing, it can take some time, but it is straightforward. But the planning consultant will submit that for you, and then you're in the process. So if you're wondering what the process is, you touched on it before. There's first and foremost, you have to get your application validated. So that process can take a little bit of time. So that might be, depending on the workload, might be a few days, could be a couple of weeks, it might be even a month, right, to get validated. And the validation is checking all of the points that you're putting forward are all of the points that they need to then assess the application in its fullest. So as an example, if an ecology report is needed because you might have a low risk of bats, they will tell you at that point to go and do the ecology report. So if you haven't picked up on that before, you then have to go away and get that report done. So that validation period might extend at that point.
Yeah.
Because if you might not have done it in advance, which your planning consultant may have helped you with, they may also miss this. They're only human, at the end of the day. So once it's validated, and there's little things, isn't there, that come with validation. Oh, you've got, your architect's missed a window, or
each council has their own intrinsic requirements, like you need this title shown and this elevation shown with this window or whatever. So sometimes it's minor.
Your drawing doesn't have a north arrow on it. It's like, well, okay, fair enough. So
the scale needs to be this. Some councils say, and those sort of things. I've just got some really funny checklists that they have that you just don't know about until they come back to you.
No, absolutely. So that validation process, if you've submitted everything correctly, 1 to 2 weeks. If you haven't, 2 to 4. Depending on your report requirement or whether or not you need to go back away and get things. Generally speaking, it could be a little bit longer depending on what the significance of the validation request. And then at that point, your planning process starts. So what will happen is on the planning portal, is you will get a number of key dates and some key information dates and so on and so forth. You've been nominated a planning officer. And it's worth touching base with that planning officer as soon as possible to say, hi, how you doing, that kind of thing. Just try and start building a relationship. And the key dates are, first and foremost, you'll get a date of consultation, and they may even give you the consultation plan. Now, if they give you a neighborhood consultation plan, that's great, because what that means is who's getting asked what the consultation is. So you may even go out and do some communication with those people.
Yeah, you could go on door knock and talk to the neighbours about any concerns.
Yeah. And some of the local authorities put specific houses on there. Some of them just put streets. So you can go and talk to those people about the plan application if it's going to be controversial. If it's non-controversial, you might not bother. In terms of the consultation date, when you might get a consultee date, which is your internal consultees, and then your public date, which is your external comments. Once that consultation period is finished, then there will be a period of time for the local authority to then assess your full application, including comments. That's the really critical time. So normally your advertising is about 21 days or something like that. I think that's the statutory date. So you have to advertise their plan for 21 days and write to the consultees for their feedback. And after that, then they start to actually really assess your plan. So the general target date is 8 weeks from validation.
Yeah, 56 days basically.
56 days.
Isn't it? Which includes the 21-day consultation process.
In that. It doesn't include validation. So validation 4 weeks plus 56, let's say.
So generally what we say is that we
60
say like, 56 days of the planning process, say like a few weeks for the consultation process. So it should be around about 3 months.
Yeah, should be.
And then if the other thing to consider is even in that time frame, it could go to committee as well, which could add on an extra.
So let's talk about that then.
Yeah.
So you will know after, based on each council has their own policy. So one of our local authorities has a very simple policy, which is if there's more than 2 objections, and their thinking is if you're doing a planning application and more than both neighbours object. So if you're doing the centre house and neighbour on the left and neighbour on the right object, any more than that, then we need to put it to committee, which is mad.
It's bonkers.
Whereas some of them have a more flexible delegated decision, which is if there are comments that are genuinely challenging the policies that we have, then we would need to put it potentially to committee. So we've had some where we've had 6 or 6. So normally there's a threshold. So the thresholds are normally single digits. It could be 2, it could be 5. I think the main one in our area is 5, and then the lowest is 2. So if you get more comments than that, then generally you go into committee. And some of the councillors are sneaky as well. They get their mates and stuff to comment, which is a bit naughty, but there. So if you're getting towards the end of the planning process, what you're looking for is the officer to support the application. That's ideal. That's your ideal scenario. So it can be refused, or it can be normally approved, subject to approval with conditions. Or
my general thinking on this is if the planning officer supports it, obviously it's a very high chance it's going to get voted through a committee. Unless there's like a political reason, I believe.
Yeah, exactly. And if the neighbours have all got together and they're all turning up and stuff like that, it puts a lot of pressure on councillors because they want the votes as well. Yeah. They don't want to be called out in the press and so on and so forth. So it does.
Yeah, that's what I mean by political pressure.
Yeah. So normally, once you know how many comments arrive, the public comments, and if the officer is going to recommend approval and there's very few comments, then you get what's called a delegated decision, which is it's just approved. It's approved by the officer. So the one this week was approved by the officer.
Yeah, because we had two objections.
But we had the same officer for 2 applications right now.
Yeah.
One of them, which was a big application, that got 2 objections, was delegated to approved. One of them, which was a very simple increase by 2 people application, has going to committee because it had 3 objections. So it just goes to show you can't really predict this stuff. Now, normally, if your application is recommended for approval, then your next committee date is the one that you would attend. If for any reason you get towards the end of that process and you make a fundamental change to your plan, which is accepted, they may need to re-advertise. They may need to do reconsult. So we've had one of those recently where we changed the internal layout slightly, and they said, well, based on that change, we need to go back to.
Yes, that could add time as well.
Yeah, so that's another 21 days, and that's going to take us into January as an example for the committee date because it has had comments. So you just got to bear those things in mind that
these are reasons why it could be a longer process.
Could be a longer process, yeah. But based on the committee, now, like planning is council specific. So some of our councils have 1 meeting, which is their decision there and then. And some of our councils have area planning meetings, which if they can then say no contest, which means basically we want to refer it to the senior planning committee, which is then
I just think it is such a waste of time. Separate area committee and then a main committee.
Well, the area committee can approve it, but then normally, if it's anything more than anything that could be controversial, even in the slightest, it goes to the
they'll just abstain it or whatever, won't they?
Yeah, they can also put conditions on approval. So it might be pending a site visit. So the councillors might all come out, and they'll come out in a bus and meet you on site, which is about as much fun as it sounds. But no, they're generally just nice people, aren't they? They've submitted themselves.
Oh, right. I know the project you're talking about. So they went out in a bus. And we actually had a highways traffic survey done. So there was some objections about traffic committee and neighbours. And in that report, it showed there was 600 and something available spaces for the tenants to park in. And it was like... I know we do have some sites where parking is actually challenging, whereas this one is not one of them.
When they turned up into the bus, they would get off the bus. I said, see, the highways report told you how easy it was to park. Your buses had no problems.
The bus pulls out.
They're all laughing on the way up. And we got no objections at the senior meeting, so that was good. But they are people at the end of the day. And you need to also appreciate that if you're going to committee, it is about the people and less about the policy, because you've already got recommendation for approval. So then it becomes about the people, and you've got to focus on what might matter to those people. So if you've had comments, and that's why you're going to committee, it's worth addressing the comments in advance, and even writing to the planning officer. That planning officer can then put those comment responses in the pack for the committee members, because you're only going to get about 3 minutes to speak. at the committee meeting. Normally you present for 3 minutes. Some ask you questions, some don't. Some you get 3 minutes in silence, and some get, you get asked questions.
Doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. Right. So to close it out, I just think I want your top 3 tips or top tips for any property developer looking to do any sort of project that requires planning.
The first one is understand what it is you're applying for. So have some knowledge. You don't have to have detailed knowledge, but some knowledge of what you're trying to do.
Yeah, the general principles.
Yeah. So if you're trying to do a commercial unit to a residential unit, as an example, then have an understanding of the prior approval process from that class to that class, or understand what falls within that class. So I hear it all the time. I'm going to convert this pub to residential, and I'm going to use prior approval. I'm like, well, you can't. So understand the prior.
Not Class C, is it? So
yeah, there's some good. There's some. Is it Litchford's Guide to use classes?
Yeah, Litchford's Guide on.
That's really good. Maybe put the link in the show notes actually for that. That's a really good, easy to digest. This is what falls under each planning class, and this is the use class orders that you can use to navigate those planning boundaries. Get your planning consultant as early as possible once you've made the decision.
Work with experts in the field, really, isn't it?
And the third one, which we haven't talked about, is in your development, if you're doing something of a good quality, tell them.
Yeah.
100%.
So HMO is probably a good example, isn't it? If you're doing a high-end, working professional HMO, top end, put that design info in the submission so they know the quality of what it's going to be.
Planning statement or design and access statement, put it in there, some photos if you can get them, or the design or whatever it is. Why? Because you're going into the technical reasons why it meets the policies, but it is the human reason that will decide it in the end. So if you're going in for a high-end product, tell the people that you're going in for a high-end product, because like as an example, the C4 class, a C4 class of property is the same is all HMOs less than 6 occupants. That doesn't mean every single one falls under that.
Yeah.
Whereas same as cars, right? So my analogy is every car has 4 wheels and a steering wheel, but there's a big difference between a Fiat and a Ferrari. You're creating a showroom in your design pack. So just make sure that you are being really clear on who you're going to target, user, and why you think it's going to be beneficial to the community, and then give some examples. That's the other tip that I would go in for.
Great, sounds good. I'll just chuck one more into there.
Yeah, go for it.
I think that's managing the process. We talked about it a bit before. Knowing the timeframes, responding to validation queries, responding to objections and comments raised in a timely fashion, making sure the information is up to what it needs to be, and then manage that time frame and process. That's when you should get your planning approvals in a timely fashion, really, as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
That's it. Yep.
Great. Well, planning. There's a bit of info there. So hopefully it's some great content for our listeners. Just to close that out, if you have not liked or subscribed to this podcast and you're listening to it on your platform of choice, please do so now. We'd really appreciate it. And that's it for now.
Catch you in the next one.
Till the next one. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you once again for joining us on the Financial Freedom Podcast, sponsored by us at Property Portfolio Building. If you want to get in touch with us about today's podcast or any of the learning topics that we've gone through today, you can email us at podcast@invest-prop.co.uk or get in touch with us with whichever your social media platform of choice is. If you think you would add value to us as a guest on this podcast, you can please get in touch and let us know what you would be able to talk to us about. Other than that, we wish you well on your financial freedom journeys. And once again, thank you for joining us, and we'll see you on the next one.